All right, good morning, everybody. So my name is Becky Seifried. I am the Geospatial Information Librarian at UMass Amherst. And today we are going to be learning about how to design a static map in QGIS, which is a free and open source mapping software. The workshop is based online. I have a project website, and I'm going to put the link in the chat for you so you can follow along there. I'll also be sharing my screen and we can look at it together. Great. Okay, hopefully everybody can see my screen now. So this is the website for the workshop that we're going to be working with today. The goal of this workshop is for you to come away and know how to use the QGIS print layout. It's like a section of the software in order to design your own static map. And here I'm defining static map as something that can be printed. So you might want to actually print it out on a piece of paper, or you might want to save it as an image file or a PDF so that you can include it in a publication, email it to people, put it online, something like that. And this is not to be confused with a web map, which is another workshop that you can explore. There's another workshop here called Build a Web Map. So if you're looking to design something that's more interactive, that's where you're going to go. So the workshop today is going to be just over an hour. We're doing introductions right now. We're going to spend a few minutes talking about best practices in map design. And we will take a few minutes to look at some example maps, just to kind of apply those concepts of map design and get some inspiration about how we might want to design our own map. And then most of the workshop today will be focusing on using the QGIS print layout. And as a reminder, you're welcome to follow along. I'll make the data available that you can download as long as you have QGIS already installed on your computer. If you don't, I'd recommend kind of sitting back and just watching and enjoying the workshop. And then at any time, please interrupt me if you have questions. We will also have some time at the end for Q&A. So let's get right started here. Best practices in map design. This is not, a comprehensive list of concepts, but it's kind of a quick summary. It's meant to be a reference guide when you do get started with making your own map. I have at the top of this page a few other resources that I recommend checking out. The state of Minnesota has a couple really great guides on map design and on static digital maps. Specifically, with advice for how to make your maps, accessible, well-designed, what kinds of elements to include, and so on. Those are much more comprehensive guides. There's also a great publication called Cartography Thematic Map Design, and you can check out in WorldCat where it is, and maybe check it out from the library if you're interested. So before you get started making your own map, I like to start by asking myself some basic questions, like what exactly do I want to map? This is surprisingly, a step that if you don't do, you will find yourself spending a lot more time down the road because you are maybe missing some data that you should have included from the start. Maybe you're not gearing it towards the right audience and so on. So these are the kinds of questions I like to ask myself. What kind of information will the map show? Who am I making it for? How am I going to be sharing this? Is it going to be an image or a PDF? Another kind of important question here is, am I going to be able to share this in color, or does it have to be in black and white? If it's for publication, often you won't be able to include color unless you pay extra money. So that's something to consider. And then also, like, what scale is appropriate for this topic? Do we want to be zoomed very far out? Do we want to be zoomed very far in? Next is the meat of this workshop, which is how to actually compose the map. And considerations there include color, how you're styling your different GIS data, fonts and labels, what kinds of classification methods. We won't be covering this in particular today. It's a much more kind of complicated topic, but if you're using quantitative data, are you responsibly displaying it? And then including important map elements. And I'm going to jump down and talk about those elements right now. So just very quickly, these are a few cool resources that you can use when you're designing a map in color. They are designed to help you figure out a color scheme that is accessible to people with different kinds of visual impairments. So for example, if we go check out Color Brewer 2.0, we can pick these different color schemes. We can say, I only want to see colorblind safe color schemes. I mean, you can play around and get some inspiration for how you might design your colors. All right. Next, we have the concept of map elements. When we look at some example maps, we'll see that there isn't just the map with the data. There's a lot of other things that make a map really informative. And some of these are, by my mapping professional standards, considered required. Other ones are considered optional. It's really up to you what you want to include, but these are some suggestions about really important elements versus some optional ones. So you definitely want to have either a title, or if you're publishing this image, some kind of caption to let people know what this map is about. You want to let people know the scale that we're looking at. And usually that is a scale bar. Sometimes you'll see publications printed out as a ratio, like 1 to 5,000. But scale bars, I think, are a little bit easier to understand and scale with if the image is stretched out or made smaller. Direction is one of those things that I frequently will omit from my maps because north is so often pointing up. But if you're making a map that is not, and it might be oriented in a different direction, it's important to include that in there. Legends are really important for people to understand what you actually have on your map. And then data sources are critical for making sure that people can access your data and remake that map if they wanted to. It's a good thing to include to let people know where your data came from. Some optional elements, you can include information about the projection, or as we know in the QGIS world, the coordinate reference system. Again, this helps with people remaking your map. You can include information about who made it and when. The when part is especially critical when we think about how accurate this data is. If you made a map in 2000, there might be more accurate data now or more up-to-date data. And so including the data on your map is important. And also locator or inset maps. That's if you've ever seen a map and there's another little map that shows you where in the world it is. That's considered an inset map. All right, and then we have this concept of framing. So when you're designing a map or any image, maybe you could apply this to designing a poster for a conference or anything like that, a chart for data visualization. Generally, the optical center where our eye kind of goes first is slightly above the actual center of an image. So when we are designing our maps, we want to think about putting the most important content right where that red star is, slightly above the geometric center. And another thing to consider is how people will approach your image or your poster or your map. Generally, because we read from left to right in English, our eyes are going to start at the top left corner and kind of drift down through the optical center down to the bottom right. And so you want to structure your poster or your map in a similar way. And the next section of this kind of design page is the assess and revise. Once you've created a map, you want to ask yourself questions like these. This is not, again, a comprehensive list of questions to ask yourself, but I always find it helpful to take a step back after I've designed a map, maybe even like sleep on it and take a look at it the next day and ask myself, is it really easy to identify important information in this map? Is the layout balanced? Is the information that's most important in the optical center? Is it taking into consideration natural eye movement? I also want to ask, is it accessible? Did the colors and fonts I used, are they going to be easy to understand and read by everyone who approaches my map? And last but not least, does it abide by the Cartography Code of Ethics? And I have a whole section on this particular page about this. There isn't one cartography code of ethics. There have been a couple proposed in recent years. The one that I have copied here is from this publication in 2009 by Dent et al. And if you take a look at this on your own time, you can see that the kind of main theme is to do as much as you can within your power to not misinform with your map. And that means being responsible about how you choose which data to include. You can't just omit data because it doesn't help your argument. It means choosing, the right classification schemes so you're not hiding data that is inconvenient. You should always provides attribution, just like in an academic publication. We want to make sure that we're giving credit to the people who created the data we're using, and so on. So these are some important considerations to keep in mind. And so now with that, kind of like prepared with this information, I'd like to spend a little time looking at some example maps. And so I have a section on this website for example maps. So again, we're going to keep in mind these questions, these assessment questions. Do these maps meet these different criteria? Are there other criteria you'd want to ask yourself when you're designing a map? So this is a map I made for my Build a Web Map workshop. I designed it as a way to kind of give a contrast between a static map and a web map. And I'm not going to say it's the best map in the world, but is it easy to identify important information is the first question. And I would say probably. I mean, there is a title. There's a subtitle that kind of explains what the purpose of the map is. So I'm not just assuming that somebody's going to be able to approach this and understand that this is a map showing the shortest day of the year. I have a legend over here, so that way you can see what the colors correspond to. The colors correspond to when the sun set. And then the size of each circle corresponds to the population. I chose a font that is sans serif, which it means there aren't the little lines on the ends of the letters. That is generally considered the better version of fonts to use, especially for digital display. I tried to make sure the font size was big enough that you could see it on the screen. However, I see that you can't actually read my credits at this scale, so that's something to keep in mind. And then the concept of optical center. So my map is actually slightly off center. It's not quite in the middle, but if people's eyes are starting up in the top left corner and drifting through the map down to the credits in the bottom right, I think that takes that into consideration a little bit. This is not the only way to design this map. It was just one that I tried making. Oh, and cartography code of ethics. So I've included credits at the bottom, including hyperlinks to the data sources. I've said who made it and when. And I'm not intentionally trying to lie with this data. It's a pretty simple data set. It's the 100 largest cities. Can't really manipulate that. And yeah, I mean, I did have a purpose in making this map. If my ulterior motive is not clear, it was to show that where we live in the Northeast is very dark on the shortest day of the year. And so there is, in a sense, like a meaning an argument I was trying to make with this map. I don't necessarily want to go through that level of detail with all the other maps, but I have some other examples that I drew from the internet. One really fun way to get inspiration from other map makers is Twitter. If you go on there and search hashtag QGIS or made with QGIS, you'll get a lot of really cool people who are making maps with this free and open source software. And so you can get inspired by their choices of data visualization. Here's an example showing the distribution of blue jays. Again, it's very simple, which in the cartography world is often kind of what we strive for. So we have just a very simple legend, and it's just kind of like a beautiful display. We have some credit down there for data sources, and then here we see the creator's name. Here's another example. This was submitted to the Esri user conference. Again, it's just like really a beautiful map. This is actually a good point in the workshop to point out that when you see these kinds of really pristine, like high quality maps, there's a very good chance that the person who made it didn't just do it in QGIS. So I want to like lower our expectations here for the kinds of maps we can create in mapping software. Oftentimes what people will do is create the kind of basic geospatial data and then import this into an image editing software like Adobe Illustrator, or they'll use Blender to really enhance the topography and add cool shadows like in this one. I don't know if this person used Blender. I would not be surprised. It just has that really nice kind of aesthetic quality. Here's another cool example. This one is not even like, this is not a data type of map. This is not data forward. It's really more about the visualization. It's like map art is a whole body of maps that are out there. Very simple. And we just see the only information really here is the creator. And I just wanted to add this one and include it because there's a cool tutorial that this person created. So you too could make a map like this using this global building footprint data set. and design some cool map art. And we have one last example. This is a little bit, it's like the oldest map on in my examples here. And it's displaying the areas where radios, where different radio stations are covering the Yankee games in blue and the Red Sox games in red, and where they overlap. And I just find this kind of like a very cool, it's got that kind of National Geographic scope to it. And we have this inset map here showing a different part of the US down in Florida, because there are a lot of folks down there who like Yankees and Red Sox. And we have a lot of data on this map too. So it's a nice kind of juxtaposition with the simpler map art above. So we have a lot of data about the stations, different cities are labeled, and conflicted cities, and so on. All right. With that, that was a very quick kind of like crash course in map design. Hopefully you now are inspired to create some cool maps. So at this point, we're going to go on to the exercise and actually start working in QGIS. I'm going to show you the kind of nitty gritty of how to use QGIS to design a map. So first, I want to point out that we have this exercise here. I'm not going to follow this exactly right now, but it is here for your future reference. So if you want to come back and kind of follow this exercise in the order in which I present it, go for it. I'm going to kind of swap the order today. But the first part that I want to draw your attention to is the aim and then what data we're going to be working with. So the idea I had for this section is, what if we were to go on a hike with our friends and we wanted to kind of like plan, we're in charge of planning that hike. So let's imagine that we're going to your favorite spot in Western Mass, which is Irving State Forest. There is a trail map for the state forest, and you can find it at that hyperlink. This is what it looks like. The Department of Conservation and Research is kind of, I think in my tiny world of map fans, famous for designing these like very, I don't know, Art Deco-y kind of maps with muted colors. They're very aesthetically pleasing. I've used this map a lot to go hiking in this particular state forest. And what I found is that I actually sometimes struggle to read it. And the reason is that it's quite zoomed out. And it's zoomed out because they're fitting it into this narrow brochure format. And they have a lot of space in this map that's dedicated to other things like basic information about the DCR, this very extensive legend. And what I really want it for is to figure out what trails I'm going to walk. And the contour lines that are on here, these elevation contour lines, are a little bit too generalized for me to get a sense of the topography. So let's say I want to make a map that fixes some of those elements just for the purposes of my hike. So I want to zoom in to a particular section of the state park. I want to add more detailed topo lines. I would like to use color because this one is very muted. And I want to use some custom symbols to mark points of interest. We see they have these points of interest marked here with the kind of like, we all understand P means parking, kind of the tent is a tenting campground. We have the little bathrooms. But what I'm interested in are these two little circles here, which are the photo vistas. They're like great places to go and take a photo. And this parking lot, which is where I'm going to tell my friends to park. All right, so I start by asking myself these basic questions. What kind of information is the map going to show? In other words, what data do I need? So specifically, I'm going to need those trails and points of interest from the DCR. I'm going to need some elevation contours. I'm going to need the boundaries of the state forest. I mean, I guess I don't really need this, but what I like about this map is everything that is in white is the state forest, and everything that is in this more muted green color is outside the state forest. And that can be important if you're concerned about trespassing on private property, or you want to make sure you're following hunting regulations or so on. So it can be helpful to know where the boundaries of the state forest are. And then lastly, I want an outline of Massachusetts to make an inset map showing where in Massachusetts we are, because maybe I have some friends coming from Maine and they got to know, get a sense of where we're going to be going. So in this particular case, my intended audience is my hiking companions. I'm not going to be thinking about, academic rigor in my citations, making sure I'm meeting publisher standards. I'm not going to be sharing this online. I mean, I am through this workshop, but in this imaginary world. So I'm less concerned about everyone kind of judging my map. My buddies are going to be very friendly to me. So then how will the map be shared? I'm probably going to export it as a PDF because I'm going to print it out for everyone. And then what scale is appropriate? So one of my specific goals is that I want my map to be a little bit more zoomed in than the DCR map. All right, so this part you can follow along with now if you'd like to follow along with your version of QGIS. I have this button right here so you can get the data and download the data I'm going to be working with. If you click that button, it takes you to a part of the GitHub repo where this workshop is stored, and you just click the download button over here. It's kind of hard to see. And that will download a zip file that has kind of like excerpts of these core data sets that have been clipped just to the Irving State Forest. If you are interested in the future in working with the original statewide data sets, I have the links here. So these 3 data sets all came from MassGIS, which is Massachusetts GIS portal, including, so for example, the DCR trails and points of interest. If we go to that website, we can read all about this data set. One of my favorite things about MassGIS is how great their metadata is. So if I scroll down, I can read how this data set came to be, what is included in the download, how it was produced, and who maintains it, and so on. So each of these has a page like that. Additionally, I downloaded the state boundaries from Natural Earth. Natural Earth is a free place to get vector data. It's really great for things like boundaries. And so I downloaded the full statewide data set for the US and extracted just Massachusetts. All right, do we have any questions at this point before I open QGIS? In case anybody joined after I shared that website link, I'm going to post it in the chat one more time. So that's the website that has all the information about this workshop. All right, at this point, I'm going to get started now with QGIS. So I've launched QGIS. I am working on a Mac, and the version of QGIS that I currently have installed is 3.22.4. You might have a different version installed, in which case it might look a little different. And if you're working on a Windows machine, it will definitely look a little bit different. But hopefully the buttons are basically the same and the processes are basically the same. All right. So I downloaded my data pack, and I have it right here. This is the version that you will see once you unzip that file. And we can see inside, I've got a number of shapefiles. If you're familiar with working with GIS data, we'll be able to see there are 5 of them. So we have all these files together are one shapefile it's the DCR roads and trails arc. Arc is like a reference to them being lines. So I imagine these are probably the trails. DCR roads, trails, point excerpt. So these are the points of interest. We have some elevation contours. We have this admin level 1. So this is the boundary of Massachusetts downloaded from Natural Earth. And we have this open, it's called open space. That's MassGIS's way to talk about state parks and things like that that are designated as public spaces. So this is going to contain the boundaries of the state forest. And I have a README file. If you ever download data from somewhere and you aren't sure about how it came to be or anything about it, look for the README file. So I created this just to include attribution about where I got these different data sets, how to cite the data, and then who made it. Some basic metadata. All right. So let's start in QGIS. I'm going to open a new empty project. Make this a little bit bigger. Okay. And when you open your QGIS, it may look a little bit different. Got zoom controls everywhere. I'm going to try to move them. All right. So one way that you can turn on and off different panels right now is by right-clicking in this gray space. And then I can turn on and off different panels. So I'm going to turn on my browser panel, which had been turned off. And this allows me to navigate to files on my computer. So I'm going to be looking for my website, or sorry, my folder dedicated to this particular workshop, which is called Static Map. and I have my trail map data pack. And when I look at it in browser mode, I see that it's really just showing me those shape files. All the other files are auxiliary ones. So let's start with the trails, for example. So I'm going to add that. I'm going to accept the basic coordinate reference system warning. And we see, yeah, sure enough, I have these trails. I'm now going to add a base map using the Quick Map Services plugin. If you aren't sure how to add a plugin, I've got a section on the Learn the Basics of QGIS workshop that kind of has some screenshots showing you how to add them. This is my favorite plugin for adding a base map. So I'm just going to add the basic OSM OpenStreetMap base map just to get a sense of where we are in the world. If I zoom out, I can see we're kind of in this section of Massachusetts. Cool. So I zoom back in. And what I'm going to do now, and this is what's different from the workshop that's on the website, I'm going to start by showing how to use the print layout. I'm just going to jump right into that. So I'm going to focus less on styling and making this a beautiful map, just so we can get a sense of how to actually create a map out of this. And then we'll have time after, so I'll come back and we can talk more about how to beautify our map and take advantage of different symbology functions. So let's at least make this a little bit easier to see. There's two ways to open the symbology. I can either double click on the icon, or I can right click and open the properties. And once we open this properties windows, I'll go to the symbology tab. And this is where I can change everything about my lines. So I can just pick one of these down here, simple brown line, and click apply. Or I can highlight that simple line and change some aspects about it. Maybe I want to make it bright red, and I want to increase the stroke width to 1. Okay. So we have a not very pretty representation of the trails in Irving State Forest, but this is going to be just fine for what we're trying to do. Sometimes QGIS will throw these warnings up here. It's just letting me know that the base map is in a different coordinate reference system than my data set. That's okay. Just going to X out of that. All right. So now you've gotten to the point. Let's imagine this is a beautiful map. The first thing I want to do is save my project. And the reason I do that is if QGIS crashes or my computer turns off, I'll be able to open my project up again and pick up where I left off. So I'm going to save my project. I'm going to save it in my project folder dedicated to this workshop. I'm going to put it right here and call it Workshop Trail Map. You can call it whatever you want, whatever will help your future self know what exactly this mapping file is about. And we see that the default kind of extension is QGZ. It's a QGIS. I assume that means a file. I don't know. Don't quote me on that one, but it's the project file that QGIS recognizes. So I'll click save. All right. Now I can tell I've saved it because it has a title up here. The magic will now begin. So if anybody here has used ArcGIS software before, the major difference between ArcMap and QGIS is that Arc's map kind of print layout is built into the map kind of area. We don't have to open a new window to get to it. In QGIS, we do. The print layout is like a kind of mini application inside this. So I have to launch the layout manager by going to Project Layout Manager. And it now pulls up a new little window. And we're saying, you can see I don't have anything in here. I haven't created any layouts yet. In QGIS lingo, every map I make is considered a layout. And I can have as many layouts as I want, maybe using the same data. So maybe I want to try experimenting with one, and then I send it to my friends and they're like, Becky, I really have no idea what this map is showing. I might come back and create a new layout and experiment with a different map. And that way I can go back and forth and I'm not always editing the same layout. So I'm going to start by creating a new layout with this create button, and I can give it a name. I'm going to say Trail Map version 1. Okay. And now we see a new window has popped up. Our layout manager is still open behind it, and our map is open behind that. But this is the layout, the map area I'm going to be working in. We can see the name. And at any time, if I make changes, I'll also want to save it up here. And that's going to save the whole project and also save my progress on this map. So in the workshop online, which I don't know where it went, there it is. There is a section of this. If you jump down to compose the map in print layout, there's some basic, what I just went through with you, how to actually launch print layout. And then this is a fun cheat sheet. I haven't seen this anywhere else, and I may improve upon it, but this I'm going to use for myself all the time. Because one of the things I found about the print layout kind of manager or whatever frame is there are these buttons along the left side, which is how we control and add things to the map. And I don't always remember what they mean. Some are a little bit obvious. There's a little scale bar that means add scale bar, but especially these top navigation ones are a little confusing. Again, if you're used to using a different GIS software like ArcGIS, they're very different. So pan, zoom, and select and move are all about things in the layout. If you imagine all the different things you're going to be dragging and dropping to design your map, the title and the legend box and things like that. And this little magical button, move item content, is how you pan around in your map once you add it. So I'll show you what those mean. We also have the add map button. That is probably our step one, and then add all of these different elements. So if we go back, the first thing I want to do, click in my map area, and I'm going to go to the item properties tab. If it didn't automatically pop up, you just click in here and open that tab. This is how we change the size of our page, of our paper. My default's to A4, that's the European standard, but I'm going to be printing this here at home in Massachusetts. So I'm going to change my page size to letter. So now it's that standard 8.5 by 11. I can know that by, if I choose custom and change the scales to inches, I can see that the height is 8.5 by 11. So then I'm going to go back to my letter, legal. And I can also change the orientation. Maybe I want my map to be up and down in portrait mode. All right, you can change this at any time, by the way. So now I'm going to add my map. So I go to the add map button. If I activate that button, I now have a little crosshair tool, and I can draw a box, a rectangle. You see this rendering map kind of information, and then it pulls like a window. We're now like looking into a window at the map that is back here, hiding. It just pulled all the information. It pulled which layers I have. I currently have just this hike line, the trail line, and this base map. It pulled the symbology, just like that. So now if we want to use these kind of tools, the pan tool allows me, if I was zoomed in, you can see I'm panning around the page as if I'm in an image editor. I can use the zoom tool, again, to zoom in to my layout. And I guess that's all I can do. I can also use my scroll wheel to do that. This move content button allows me to grab that whole map window and move it around or resize it any way that I want. And you can see the map keeps rendering automatically when I do that. And then my favorite button here, which I always forget exists, is the move item content. And here now I can, once it's activated, I can actually move around in my map. If I use my scroll wheel, that's how I zoom in and out. So these are kind of the basics to help you plan and frame the map, which is arguably the most important part of making your map. Another thing I can do in terms of scale, let's say I make my map a little bigger again, is I can use this information over here, the map properties, to change the scale. So as long as my map is highlighted, and I go to item properties is now all kinds of information, magical things I can change just about the map. If you notice, if I click outside of the map, item properties goes back to talking about the whole map design, like the whole layout. So if I want to change anything about the map, I have to click the map box. And I can change the scale here. Maybe I want the scale to be 50,000. Ta-da! And I click return, and it zooms to the scale of 50,000. I can rotate my map. I can change the coordinate system. Right now, it's just using the project CRS, but I could change it if I wanted. What other things down here? I could add a grid if I was interested in adding like a grid showing the coordinate system. I could do that there. I can add a frame. So if right now there is no frame around my map, I can add one by checking frame, and I can change how thick that frame is. This will be your friend whenever you're adding any items. So if we add a scale bar or a north arrow, if you highlight that item, the item properties will update so that you can change information about that particular item. All right, so likewise, let's show you what happens if we try to add some other elements. So let's say I want to add a title now. So I'm going to click this add label. It's another way of saying add text. And I'm going to draw where I want that text to be. And because it's a text box now, I see item properties kind of updates and allows me to type in what I want the text to read. I don't type in here, I type in this box. So let's say, this is a great title. I can now change how this looks by scrolling down to the appearance section. So from the font menu, like with other QGIS applications, if you've worked with QGIS before, you know, if you click on this on the actual box, it pulls up one kind of menu. If you click this little drop down arrow, it pulls up a different menu. So try exploring. Feel free to click around and get a sense for what these different things do. If I click in this box, I can choose a different font here. So let's go with phosphate. And I want it to be much bigger. Let's say 36. And I'm going to click OK. I now have a title. This is a great title, and I can change the color. Let's make it red to kind of go with the theme of our trail map. I can change, maybe I want it centered, maybe I want it aligned in the middle. So these are all ways I can change any kind of text. You can use this also to like add manual labels to your map. So let's say I want to put a little label here that says like, this is the best trail. I can, again, go about this, changing the font, making it bigger, making it bold. Cool, this is the best trail right here. So this is another way you can kind of annotate your map without fooling around with labels, which is something you can do in the map itself if you want to add labels kind of automatically, or you can add them manually like this. Ta-da. All right, let's try adding a scale bar. So I'm going to add my scale bar down here at the bottom. So I click the add scale bar button and again, draw a little box and it automatically generates a scale bar. This one again is a little bit different than the way ArcMap behaves. Item properties allows us to style it how we want. We see that right now, the scale bar is tied to map 1. Up here in this, I didn't go over this yet, but the items section is showing us all the elements we have in the map. Right now, we only have one map. If I were to add a little inset map, I could then change this scale bar to reflect that inset map. But right now, I only have one map. It's just reflecting the scale of map 1. I can change the units. Let's say I want it to be feet. I can change the way that is displayed. Right now, it is displayed as FT, which is great. I can do all kinds of customization. Maybe I want there to be 4 little boxes, just like that. And yeah, I'm just play around with this. You can do all kinds of things, adding frame, background, position, display, everything like that. Okay, so we have a basic map. We have a title, we have a scale bar, we have some data. I might pan to make it a little bit more centered. Great, I now have a map. What if I want to include an inset map? So to do this, the key thing, and one of the coolest things about QGIS print layout, I think, is all the mapping that I'm doing is taking place here. So if I were to change this, let's say I turn off the trail layer and I go back to my print layout. If I highlight my map and click the refresh button or update map preview, it's going to pull the changes I made in my map area into my map. That is not what I wanted. I wanted my trails to still be there. So I'm going to go back and turn on my layer, refresh my map layout. And then if I click this button, lock layers, what that means is it will not toggle them on and off if I do that in the map. So I can go back to my map and now turn off my hike layers, come back here, refresh. It will keep them turned on because I've locked them. I can also lock the styles for layers, which means if I make changes to the color in here, it will not change the color in here. So let's experiment. I actually haven't done this. Oh, you do have to keep them both on. So yeah, anyway, that I now have to refresh. But that is a way to make sure that you can kind of change things about your map and create a little inset map that's drawing on different layers, but your original map stays exactly how you want it. Okay, so let's go back here and add that state boundary file. So I've got this admin1 MA file, which is the outline of the state of Massachusetts. If I zoom to that layer, there is my beautiful outline of Massachusetts. And let's say I want my inset map to not have a base map. I just want the outline. This is what I want my inset map to look like. I've styled it. I want it to be green. Now, when I go back to my map, my print layout, I'm going to add another map. So I click the Add Map button, and I draw a little box where I want my inset map to be. And we see that it has now pulled, again, the active live layers that are currently in my mapping session. So I'm going to do the same thing when I add an inset map. I'm going to lock those layers so that I don't accidentally, turn it off if I go back to the map. So right now I have two maps, both of which are locked. To demonstrate what I meant about that scale bar. So right now we see the scale bar is representing this amount of distance is 10,000 feet because it's linked to my very zoomed in trail map. If I change now the scale bar to reference map 2, which is the state of Massachusetts, we see that it has now become very, very tiny, because let's say I want this to be in kilometers, and I'm going to need there to be fixed width. Let's do 1,000. That was not right. Let's change the fixed width to 100. There we go. So now we see that the scale bar, this tiny little area, is representative of 200 kilometers. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. My little scale bar now is no longer referring to this map, it's referring to this map. And so that's something that you want to be aware of when you're adding a scale bar. You want to make sure that it's referencing the right map. Okay, cool. Do we have any questions about the very basics of the QGIS print layout?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So for the scales, you only need one scale, even though you have two maps.
That's a really good question. Right. So most people, I think, would probably just have a scale bar referencing the main map. That is like, right. I asked myself again, what is the purpose of my map? My map is to get my hiking buddies to be able to navigate. So they really only need a scale bar for this map. So I probably will just make sure my scale bar is accurate to that particular map. Let's see, I think it was 25, and it was not kilometers, it was feet. Yeah, cool, like that. If you have an inset map like this that is very general and it's showing just basic, where are we? We're in Massachusetts. People often won't include a scale bar. But if it's a bigger inset map and it's more zoomed in, let's say I'm trying to show people kind of the town names or something like that. So let me update my little map. And I'm trying to show them where we are in relation to the Quabbin. And so it's a little bit more detailed. I might want to include a scale bar in the little corner right here so that people know the scale of this map because it's more detailed. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Sweet. Any other questions? All right. I think at this point, I'd love to spend a little bit more time talking about how to make these maps a little bit prettier than the one that I've made right now. These are the basics of how to use print layout. I will say personally, I've been using QGIS for years, and to get to this point of being able to do all this without looking it up on QGIS's documentation was a struggle. But I tried to share with you the things that I think are the really most important parts, especially that lock layers button. This is a magical button that allows you to go back and forth and make changes in your map and make sure that your print layout is reflecting those changes. On the project or the website, if we go back up to the top, I have in here a kind of step-by-step guide for how to go from adding all of the layers that I shared in that data pack, how to, I don't go through the details of how to style them, but an example of how you might choose to style them. So in this example, I've added just a couple points of interest. I highlighted the route that we'll be following. I chose a color scheme that is aesthetically pleasing to myself, which is like purples and teals. And I added this cool drop shadow effect to the borders of the state park to make it look like you'd be falling off a cliff if you left the state park. I go through a little bit about how to apply labels. And then the final bit that we can do right now is how to save your map. So once you are done styling your map, you want to assess it, and then it's very easy to export it. If I was happy with the way this map is right now, which I think it could probably be improved a little bit, but if I'm happy with it, all I have to do is go up to this top menu and click export as image, export as SVG, or export as PDF, and it will save it onto my computer. And then I can email it to my friends and say like, hey, what would you improve about this map? They might say, hey, I can't read your title. That's okay. So yeah, let's go back to this QGIS interface and play around with all the data that I have given you. So I'm going to add the rest of the data sets that are not in there. I've got the trails arc. I'm going to add points. I'm going to add contours, and I'm going to add the open space. All right. So we can see that when you add layers to QGIS, by default, they are just random colors assigned to them. Again, we want to make sure that things like polygons are on the bottom of the map, and things like lines and points are on the top. Drawing order, things on top are drawn on top in our map. And my kind of approach to this would be to work on each individual layer to get it to look the way I want, and then see how they look together and maybe make some changes. So first thing I'm going to do is change the base map. OSM standard is really helpful for figuring out where we are, because it has roads labeled, it has the state, you can see the state boundary is right there highlighted in green. It's got major roads, towns, but for purposes of designing a map, I might use something a little more aesthetically pleasing. One of my favorites is CartoDB's positron. I'm going to choose positron no labels. And if I add that and turn off OSM standard, we see it's a much more simplistic map. There's no labels on this version. The lakes and water bodies are kind of pleasant dark gray. And I think this will be a good kind of base map for what I'm trying to do. So let's start with the contours. There are many different ways you can use concepts of symbology to design things. Right now, this is what's called single symbol. The same color and width is applied to all the lines in this data set. But if you ever look at a historical kind of topo map, you might notice that oftentimes certain increments of contour lines will be slightly darker or thicker to help, the viewer understand where that line is, if they're approaching a mountain from different sides. So if I open the attribute table and explore what data is contained inside this, I will see there is a field for elevation in meters, a field for elevation in feet. There's this interesting field called index arc, which if I look at the things that are indexed and have a yes there, I see that they all tend to be, if I sort this, I'm going to sort it, we can see that the yeses are like 150, 165, 180. So they're in increments of 15. Thanks, MassGIS. You've made my job really easy. You created a field for me that I can use to style those incremental 15-meter incremental lines. So now if I open the symbology for this, how did I add the contour lines? So this is in that data pack that I downloaded from the website. If I go back to my little workshop website at the top, decide what you want to map. There it is. There's a red button, get the trail map data pack. If you download that and unzip it, what it looks like is this package here. And there are several files in there. And so I added it to my QGIS session through the browser panel, and I navigated to where I saved it on my hard drive and just dragged and dropped it in. The other way you can add vector data or raster data is through the add vector button, which looks like a little V. I don't know what happened. Oh, QGIS is not happy with me. Why? Oh. I'm not sure what happened. Let's see. I must have a window open. There it is. One of the fun things about working with QGIS on a Mac is you get a lot of windows. And if you have one of these windows open, you have to close it before it lets you do anything. Okay. So you can also click this V button and navigate to where it's stored on your hard drive. And that's another way to add data to your session. All right, so now I'm going to style this particular line. Again, we can just choose to apply the same color and width to all the contours. Maybe I want them to be a kind of shade of gray. If I click apply, I can see what that looks like. Maybe I want them to be a little bit thicker. We'll see what that looks like. Oh, that's a little too thick. Let's go back to maybe 0.2. Cool. So that's one way I can style line layers. Or I can do it something that is called rule-based or graduated. Either one would work. In this case, I'm going to show you how to do, let's do categorized. Categorized is what I meant. What this means is it's going to look through your attribute table and retrieve data from that and use that data to style different types of data. So if I tell it to look at that index arc field and I click the classify button down at the bottom, that's going to retrieve all the unique values in the attribute table. There's only two. There's no and there's yes. And this allows me to style them differently. So anything that is not indexed is one of those lines that's between the 15 meters. So let's say I want to create those and I want them to be gray and I want them to be this narrow kind of like 0.2 width. I'm going to click OK, apply. Cool. We see that I haven't changed the ones that are indexed as yes, so they're pink right now, just randomly, but I can change that. I can make them also gray, but I can make them thicker, like 0.5. Click apply. And now we have what looks a little bit more like a typical topo map, where increments of 15 meters are slightly darker. So that could be helpful to my friends who want to kind of walk around and know how tough the mountain's going to be as they're climbing it. All right. Another thing we can do is I'm going to show you how to do the rule-based. So this point data set is huge. There are a lot of points of interest in Irving State Forest. Most of them are not things I want to put on my map. If I open the attribute table and take a look at what's in there, I can see that I have 229 points of interest. If I look at the type and sort it, we see that we've got buildings. Cool. We have dead ends. Don't need that on my map. Gates could be interesting. Parking areas would be interesting. Picnic tables. We have one, whatever recreational is, one recreational site, a couple road bridges, road signs, trail crosses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then the one I was looking for is Vista. All right. So let's say I want to put in this map where the vistas are and where the picnic tables are. I don't need the rest of the points to show up on my map. So I'm going to use a different kind of symbology called Windows, flying everywhere. I'm going to use rule-based. What this means is I'm going to use kind of basic querying language to ask it to retrieve just the fields that are vistas and picnic tables. And I'm going to create custom like point representations for them. So I start by adding a rule with this little plus button down here. And I'm going to call this one, this label is going to be vistas. And I now have to filter through my data set. I want it just to find those two vista points out of the 229. So I'm going to click the little, it's like an equation button to create my query equation. If you've used QGIS before to like, use field calculator and calculate new fields, this is going to look very familiar. It's the expression string builder. So I'm building an expression, a querying expression in here, and then I can kind of preview it to make sure that it will actually retrieve anything from my attribute table. And the quick way that I like to do this is I expand the fields and values section. This tells me that these are all the fields in the attribute table. The one I want is type, because I'm looking for type as Vista. So if I double click that, I load it into my expression builder. And I want type to equal Vistas. So I can just type in Vistas, but I'm not sure that's exactly how it's coded in the data set. So a very helpful thing to do is in the right panel, click all unique. And that will pull all of the unique values that exist in that field. And then I can go down and find Vista, double click it and load it into my expression builder. So right now it's going to look through all 229 records and find just the ones where type is equal to Vista. If I click OK, I now have this expression in here and I can change the marker. So for now, let's pick a red diamond and I click OK. So right now we have this like no filter, everything will be red. And then this vistas, if I turn this off, so the only points that should be shown in my map are vistas, and I click apply. Sure enough, it is only being told to apply this red diamond to the things that are vistas. And the other points are still there, they're just not being shown in the map. So let's do that also for picnic tables. So I'm going to add a new rule. I'm going to create an equation where type equals picnic table. Okay. And I want it to be this time a blue triangle. Okay. Click apply. Oh, I didn't give it a title. Label picnic table. Well, apply. Look at all those picnic tables. Sweet. I didn't even know there was one down there, but there is. So this might be what I want to include on my map. One other kind of fun thing I want to show you about point symbology. QGIS, one of the fun things that makes QGIS so lovely is that it's a very lightweight, free and open source GIS software. It doesn't come with a lot of built-in stuff, which is why I'm using plugins. I'm using the plugin to get the base maps. I also use a plugin called resource sharing in order to get different kinds of like marker symbols. That right now we see that the basics that come with QGIS are pretty simple. They're just a couple basic shapes and colors. We don't have a lot of cool like picnic table representations. But if I enable this plugin resource sharing, I can download packages of what are called SVG icons. And the one that I really like, I have it linked in the website, is called Mackies, or like Mapbox Mackies. I don't know how to pronounce that. So the way we enable that or start accessing it is to select simple marker, and instead of it being a simple marker, I'm going to make it a SVG marker. And then if I scroll down, I see that I now have access to the package I download, Mapbox's Mackies icons. And these are all the cool little icons that I've got in there. So if I search for anything coded as picnic table, I have two options. I'm going to select that one. And then we see it gets loaded up here, and I can change the size, right, like that. Click OK, apply. Now I have, oh, I did it to vistas by accident, but you get the sense. Those are not picnic tables, but for this purpose, I'm going to do that. And I can also do some cool things to that, like maybe I wanted to stand out from the background a little bit. So I might add behind my simple marker, or behind my SVG marker, maybe a white circle. So I can make the background white, and I can make it larger. And I can move it down below my picnic table. And so now I'm going to have my picnic table surrounded by a little white circle. Click apply. There. So that's a cool way to style, you know, kind of custom point location markers so they look a little bit different. All right. So we've styled two of the layers. I want to see if there's another way. One other quick thing I want to show you, because in the example in the website, I've like highlighted a favorite trail of mine in a particular color. I could do that with the method I showed you, like the rule-based. I could find out the names of all those trails and say, if the trail has a name of like Mountain Road and Swoop Trail, make it blue. That is going to require a lot of effort on my part, and I might make a mistake, and because there's a lot of individual trail segments in there. So another thing I like to do, kind of another quick tip is if I just select using the select button, the trails that I want to be in my final kind of map. So I'm highlighting right now, I'm just holding down the shift key and selecting all the components of the trail that I want to show up in my map. I don't want that one. So let's say this is my trail. It's like an out and back. I'm starting here, going down here. It is a little hard to see because it's yellow. I have now selected just a few trails in this much larger data set. I can now export them as a separate shapefile. And then I can just apply a basic symbology to that separate shapefile, and I don't have to worry about rule-based symbology or anything like that. So I'm going to right-click that bigger data set and say export save selected features as. So this is just going to pull those ones that I highlighted. And I will want to save them somewhere on my hard drive, preferably in my project, folder. I might create a new folder for like custom layers, something like that. And I'm going to call it favorite trail, save. I'm saving it as a shapefile. That's the format I'm choosing to work in. I could also save it as a different kind of format, like GeoJSON is another one that would behave similarly to this. And I'm going to make sure the coordinate reference system is correct and then click OK. And now if I clear my selection, we can see it has added this line right here. So it just extracted that line that is my favorite trail. So now I can add whatever kind of symbology I want to that. Let's say I want to make it green and a little bit bigger than the red ones. Now that is a way that I can kind of style and highlight my particular favorite trail. One other thing that I did in my maps, my examples here, I added a drop shadow, not only to my favorite trail, but also to my little vector icons. I also used a kind of shadow effect on this open layer. It's a little bit more complicated, but the concept is the same. And I want to show you where to do that. So let's make this one a little bit less obvious. Okay, so we're working with this kind of green favorite trail layer. I'm going to make it brighter so that we can all see it. Let's make it red. Cool. So now I've got this red line I want to add a drop shadow to. If I expand layer rendering section of my symbology tab, right here kind of hidden is this draw effects box. If I check it and open the tiny little star icon, I can now apply cool draw effects to this layer. So let's say I want to add a drop shadow. I can preview what that will look like here. And then I can, if I select it, change some attributes about it. So maybe I want the blur radius to just be 2, and I want the actual drop shadow just to be 1.5. And I click OK, and I click apply. I now have applied a drop shadow to my very cool line. So all of those kinds of things I showed you, the simple symbology, the categorized symbology, rule-based symbology, drop shadow effects are all things that I use to create the map in the website. The one last thing that I think we have right on time, the last thing I want to show you is labeling. Labels, just like those different symbology attributes, can be pulled from your attribute table. So if we look at my favorite trail attribute table, I see that there is a field here called name. So maybe I want to apply these like as labels on my map. If I open my properties for your favorite trail, there's another tab called labels, and that's where I change this. So I say I want there to be single labels based on that value, that field in the attribute table called name. And I can style the font. I can do all kinds of things to it, but right now I'm just going to click apply and see what happens. So the default is it applies Mossbrook Road, Cutoff Road, Foster Road. And now I can start playing around with this and make it look prettier. I can again let's use phosphate again. I'm a big fan of that. And we might make it a little bit bigger. Apply. And I can start doing things like changing the placement. Maybe I want it to be curved instead of horizontal. That will make the label curve with the road. Maybe I want it to be 1 or 2 millimeters away from the line, like that. So there are all these different things I can play with to get it to look exactly the way I want. In the example, in the website, in my label section, we see that I was able to configure it so that all these different parts of this much larger favorite road were labeled. And I also labeled this road so that my friends would know how to get to the parking area. So we are basically at time for me to do the demo part. We have 10 minutes left though, and I'd love to field some questions or comments. If there's anything you'd like me to show you again, or some other thing maybe you've been trying to do in your map that you haven't figured out how to do, I'd love to show that. So thanks very much. I'll stick around for another few minutes.